So every now and then you have to preach some of those icky scriptures, especially during Lent. These types of texts, like all of this that Paul writes in Romans about the sins of the flesh, letting go of our sinful selves and receiving the healing power of Christ into us. We need to wrestle with these texts that are at the core of our faith, especially during Lent. And the reason is this: if we don't do it, and we don't have language to describe what conversion experience means to us, then those people who ring our doorbells to ask if we have been saved get to have the last word. So it is my humble hope that we can wrestle with this spiritual versus religious question that gets us so tangled up sometimes in our sermon today. If you read my View from the Earth, I have to lead off with a great laugh out loud moment that I got on Wednesday night, Ash Wednesday. I was watching Jimmy Fallon, which I don't often do, and he began his monologue saying, I think as a former Irish Catholic, he's explaining to people that the season of Lent. And if you need to understand the season of Lent, it's kind of like this. It's this great opportunity that Christians get that not everyone else gets, to take all of those great New Year's resolutions that we made back in January and to start over and fail at them all over again. If you didn't feel guilty and bad enough about your inability to, whatever Paul said, to do what it is that you mean to do instead of those things that somehow you do without meaning to do them when you know better, if you weren't feeling bad enough about that in, say, I don't know, for me it's about January the 8th, maybe you can make it to January 28th, but if you didn't feel bad enough back then, here's your chance during Lent to feel bad and guilty all over again. I think that we can perhaps best understand this struggle between flesh and spirit in two ways. One is, Paul was writing a letter to the Romans. The Romans clearly understood the world as divided between the world of the mind, which was transcendent and beautiful and wonderful and male, by the way, and the world of matter and flesh, which was animalistic, sexual, women, bad, negative. It was a very dualistic universe. So Paul is actually using language that is very familiar to them about division to make a point. Unfortunately, it sounds like he's endorsing the very kind of faith that we don't believe in, where, people beat themselves up and it's all shame-based and we all just feel bad together once a week when we come to church. This is what leads people to say, I'm spiritual but not religious, I think. So it behooves us to articulate how God is both spiritual and religious, and how our church is both spiritual and religious, and that Jesus Christ, the man who was both divine and human, somehow managed to articulate in himself, in his life, in his body, the both and of that. Now, if this doesn't make any sense to you, think about that walk that Jesus was taking with Peter when they got into their little argument. I love Bible language, right? Peter rebuked Jesus, and then Jesus rebuked him back. All this is an argument while they're driving the car, right? Jesus is telling people how this isn't going to end well. He's going to end up in Jerusalem and he's going to be crucified. And Peter, like any good campaign manager, says you cannot give up before your first primary. This is not positive thinking. This is not helpful. This is negative. People will not respond to this message. Listen to me. And Jesus says, flip your way of thinking. God's ways are not our ways. And he tries to preach the gospel of the cross. Now, if you are discouraged that you don't understand the gospel of the cross, just know that you were in good company, because none of the disciples seem to understand it one bit either. If you read the whole of Mark, I had a friend who actually did a great slideshow as a seminary project showing slides of the Three Stooges as they went through the book of Mark, one time after another, not understanding the faintest thing about what Jesus was trying to teach them. But the best lesson that I could read about how living in the shadow of death leads to life, if you lose your life, you find it. If you find your life, we'll lose it, was in this wonderful new book I just read by Annie Lamott called Small Victories, Spotting Improbable Moments of Grace. I just wanted to read to you the first page. I love her voice. The first page of her first, well, she calls it the prelude. Prelude, victory lap, she calls it. She says this: the worst possible thing you can do when you're down in the dumps, tweaking, vaporous with the victimized self-righteousness or bored, is to take a walk with dying friends. They will ruin everything for you. First of all, friends like this may not even think of themselves as dying, although they clearly are, according to recent scans and gentle doctors' reports. But no, they see themselves as fully alive. They are living and doing as much as they can, as well as they can, for as long as they can. They will ruin your multitasking high, that bath of agitation, rumination, and judgment you wallow in. And they won't have the decency to come out and just say anything. They bust you by being grateful for the day, while you're obsessed with how thin your lashes have become and how wide your bottom. My friend Barbara had already been living with Lou Gehrig's disease for 2 years on the spring morning of our Muir Woods hike. She had done and tried everything to stem the tide of deterioration, and you would think, upon seeing her with a fancy four-wheeled walker, needing an iPad-based computer voice named Kate to speak for her, that the disease was having its way. And this would be true, except that besides having ALS, Barbara had her breathtaking mind, a joyously bottomless thirst for nature, and Susie, her girlfriend of 30 years. That, you see, gave her an unfair advantage over the rest of us. We get so tangled up in our little troubles of life that we struggle to pull back day by day and get the big picture as God sees it. It is in the shadow of the night that we can appreciate the beauty of the dawn or of the sunset. This is a core, central value of the Christian faith, and one so difficult to understand that my wonderful professor in seminary, Marcus Borg, whose book Convictions really looks very deeply at this. I recommend it to you even if you're not in the women's study. He said that reading Paul, especially without having ever experienced any kind of mystical experience like Annie Lamott was experiencing walking so slowly with her friend who was clinging to life, if you've never really experienced the transcendent presence of God in an unlikely moment, then reading Paul about his miraculous conversion and the new way of seeing things, he said it's kind of like reading a manual written in Japanese and translated badly into English about how to install your water heater. Faith is best experienced, and it's least effective explained. So pity me, your preacher, right? As we try to put into words things that are unnameable. And that, my friends, I think is the beauty of religion. Like the spiritual draws us out of ourselves and into the mountaintop, but then how do we come down from the mountain and ever try to tell anybody what it was like? How, for poor us, do we ever reclaim, reimagine, re-experience those moments of transcendence and joy? Sometimes I pray that it happens here in church. Sometimes it's in moments of music, when the rapture comes and the entire choir is transported. It was a great anthem last week, apparently. Sometimes it's in a moment of helping a friend. Sometimes it's in a moment in Sunday school when a kid just gives the best hug in the world. Sometimes it's in stumbling over the bags and bags and bags and bags of groceries that you all have poured out in these religious acts of compulsive shopping for others. God's spirit of abundance is tangible, is real, is embodied in our life of faith when we care for one another. And in this table of communion, what an act of genius communion was. For Jesus to say, don't remember these 3 important words or something, because he said so much. He said, every time you gather at the table, give thanks to God. Break the bread. Share it with one another. And remember me. Such a tangible way of remembering Jesus' greatest commandment, to love God and to love one another as we have been loved. It happens, well, for me, it happens 3 times a day. I rarely miss a meal. It happens religiously, my eating. Would that our gratitude and our experiences of God's transforming gracious love, may it happen just as frequently, and may it be shared just as joyously. Amen.